Let us know the Bible. Catholic Letters with Father Claudio Doglio. Letter of James. In addition to the letters of the Apostle Paul, there are 7 writings in the collection of the New Testament named Catholic letters. They are called so because the adjective Catholic means universal. In effect, they are letters that are not addressed to a specific community, as was the case with the Apostle Paul, but they are universal letters, that is, addressed to all the people. Today, we can speak of encyclical letters in papal language. Moreover, they were considered Catholic because they were accepted by all. They were universally recognized as canonical texts. That is, they belonged to the canon, to the deposit of faith. And for that reason, they were inserted in the New Testament. So, there are 7 letters. They are the letter of James, 2 letters of Peter, 1 letter of Jude, and 3 of John. First, let us take into consideration the letter of James. First of all, it must be said that these writings do not have, properly speaking, the characteristic of a letter, that is to say, of a literary instrument that is linked to people who are physically far away to communicate information and ask for news. It is mainly homilies. The letter of James is an actual anthology of sermons, almost fragments, pieces of homilies that have been collected with a criterion that somehow escapes us, so much so that we cannot recognize a common thread. The author introduces himself at the beginning simply with the name James. The ancient tradition has consistently recognized in this character one of the apostles. And we know that 2 apostles bore the name of James. We distinguish them with the title the Elder and the Lesser. We call James the Elder, the brother of John, sons of Zebedee, the first of the apostles to die a martyr's death in the early 40s in Jerusalem under the responsibility of King Herod. Therefore, he cannot be the author of this writing. James the Lesser is recognized as the author, called the brother of the Lord, the leader of the community of Judeo-Christians living in Jerusalem. He died a martyr in the early 60s. Perhaps it could be a problem referencing the fact that he is called brother of Jesus. In the Jewish milieu, and the term brother was commonly used to indicate a close relationship without any particular distinction, for example, between uncle and nephew, cousin and son-in-law, daughter-in-law and brother-in-law. These are terms that we have to indicate a precise degree of kinship. But in the Jewish language of the time, on the other hand, all these relationships were termed brothers and sisters, close relatives, members of a great patriarchal family. According to the information of the Judeo-Christian tradition, we can say that this James was the son of Cleopas, also called Alphaeus, who had married a woman named Mary, known precisely as Mary of Cleopas or Mary of James. Cleopas must have been the brother of Saint Joseph. So this James turns out to be the cousin of Jesus, called his brother just to emphasize the close relationship to which their family belongs. However, it is not sure that this James is the author of the letter. Let us not forget that the name James is a deformation of Jacob. It is the same name, in fact, and in Greek it is Jacobos. Passing through Latin, it became Jacopo. And then we made it become James, Giacomo James. So, in the original tenor of the text, the author presents himself as Jacob writing to his 12 sons, to the 12 tribes. It is strong Jewish writing. Only on 2 occasions he mentions Jesus Christ, but in unimportant passages. It must be said that the whole thought of the text is not strongly Christian or typically Christian. It contains moral teaching that could also be of good Jewish standard, and seems to be a spiritual testament that Jacob addresses to his sons, to the scattered tribes of the diaspora. Probably the Christian author imagined himself to be a new patriarch who writes to the new 12 tribes of the new Israel scattered in the world, and writes recommendations and advice. It is a text that contains little proclamation and much exhortation. For example, let us look at the beginning, after the author has introduced himself, saying, James, a slave of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes in the dispersion, greetings. And then it begins immediately with an exhortation. Consider it all joy, my brothers, when you encounter various trials, for you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. From this text, St. Francis drew his message of perfect joy. James invites his brothers to consider greater happiness, full glory, the moment of passing through trials. He addresses the Christian communities, evidently, that are going through times of difficulty, and therefore it is an exhortation to courage, endurance, commitment, and even valorization of difficult situations. Blessed is the man who perseveres in temptation, for when he has been proved, he will receive the crown of life that God promised to those who love him. Temptation is understood as the test, the difficult moment that brings to light the deep sense, intention, and will of the person. No one experiencing temptation in the difficult moments of trouble, should say, I've been tempted by God. Don't give the blame to God, for He tempts no one. Rather, each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. It's the epithumia, which is also used by St. Paul, the impulse, concupiscence, instinct, desire. Then desire conceives and brings forth sin. And when sin reaches maturity, because it seduces him, and it gives birth death. There is a dynamic of corruption that the author underlines, showing how, in the great majority of cases, the problems are within us. They are our desires, our ideas, our mania, and our pretensions that deceive us. They lead us to desire evil, to the point of making us perform actions, evil words. A particular emphasis of James is on the tongue. If anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, his religion is vain. And a little farther on, he stresses again, if anyone does not fall short in speech, he is a perfect man, able to bridle his whole body also. We put beads into the mouths of horses to make them obey us. So it is the same with sheep. Even though they are so large and driven by fierce winds, they are steered by a tiny rudder wherever the pilot's inclination wishes. In the same way, the tongue is a small member and yet has great pretensions. Consider how small a fire can set a huge forest ablaze. The tongue is also a fire. It is very dangerous. We have sayings about the tongue. For example, the tongue has no bone, but it breaks bones. One kills more with the tongue than with the sword. The sense is of speech that harms. We can hurt with the tongue. If we know how to control it, says James, we steer the rest of the ship with this rudder. In chapter 2, the author develops a complex argument about the relationship between faith and works. And it is a typically Pauline argument. It would seem that James is saying the opposite of Paul. In fact, as we recall, St. Paul taught in several writings that salvation comes by faith and not by works. By the works of the law, no one is justified. Instead, James writes, "What good is it, my brothers, if someone says that he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or sister has nothing to wear and has no food for the day, and one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, keep warm, eat well,' but you do not give them the necessities of the body, what good is it? So also, if it does not have work, the faith in itself is dead." Indeed, someone may say, "You have faith, and I have works. Demonstrate your faith to me without works, and I will demonstrate my faith to you from my works. You believe that God is one. You do well. Even the demons believe that and tremble. Do you want proof, you ignoramus, that faith without works is useless? Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered his son Isaac upon the altar? For just as a body without a spirit is death, so also faith without works is death." Is it the opposite of what Paul says? It may seem so, but it is not. We need to clarify some crucial issues. Paul uses the word faith to refer to a person's trust in God. And this is the basis of salvation. God saves us if we surrender to Him and let Him save us based on our faith. And when James speaks of faith, but he refers to all doctrines and dogmas. So here, faith means a theoretical knowledge of truth. Also, God exists. Also, the devil believes that. And he is afraid of him and hates him. In this sense, James says that to know these things and to accept them in theory is not enough. James says that the devil believes that there is God. St. Paul would never have said that the devil believes in God, because to believe in means to trust, to abandon oneself, to have confidence. And the devil attitude is just the opposite. It is the rejection, the hostility, the opposition of God. Therefore, we have here two different concepts of faith. Secondly, when Paul speaks of works, he refers the works of the law, of the Jewish law. They are the ritual works. For example, the observance of the Sabbath, the practice of circumcision, the distinction of pure from impure foods. These ritual rules are not conducive to a good relationship with God. These are the works of the law, which are not sufficient for salvation. On the other hand, when James speaks of works, he refers to works of charity. They are very different, and he means that the theoretical knowledge of the truth is not enough. One must translate them into the practice of life. Knowing that God exists leads to a life that is active and good. On the other hand, Paul was speaking of the cause of salvation. The cause can never be the work done by people. Instead, James is speaking of the consequences of salvation, and he says that there must be consequences. Therefore, Paul and James are in perfect agreement. They say two things from different perspectives, but are substantially homogeneous. Paul says that salvation is based on trust in God and not on man's claim to do works to merit salvation. James affirms that the knowledge of the truth necessitates practical consequences of good works, which give life to the theory. That is why James insists on these works, not as the cause of salvation, but as a consequence. They are the results and effects derived from them. And all his writing is an anthology of exhortations. For example, where do the wars and where do the conflicts among you come from? It is not from your passion that make war within your members. You covet, but you do not possess. You kill and envy, but you cannot obtain. You fight and wage war. You do not possess because you do not ask. You ask, but you do not receive because you ask wrongly. You spend it on your passions. Adulterers, don't you know that to be a lover of the world means enmity with God? We now hear the tone of fervent preaching. And he continues to lash out. A little farther on, he speaks of the rich. James presents a community of the poor and has social inequality and serious injustice before his eyes. In chapter 5, we find a tremendous invective like that of a popular rally against the owners of the land. Come now, you rich, weep and wail over your impending miseries. Your wealth has rotted away. Your clothes have become moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and that corrosion will be a testimony against you. It will devour your flesh like a fire. You have stored up treasure for the last days. Behold, the wages you withheld from the workers who have harvested your fields are crying aloud, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on earth in luxury and pleasure. You have fattened your hearts for the day of slaughter. You have condemned. You have murdered the righteous one. They have eaten as much as they please. They have grown fat. and they shall be slaughtered like fattened animals. It is a strong tone and that also indicates an early Christian preaching style. One last detail. Towards the end, James refers to the sick, and it is the only text that refers to the sick that speaks of the anointing of the sick. And precisely from this apostolic teaching, the Church bases herself to talk about this sacrament. Is anyone among you sick? He should summon the presbyters of the church, and they should pray over him and anoint him with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer of faith will save the sick person, and the Lord will raise him up. If he has committed any sins, he will be forgiven. It goes from one topic to another, without a common thread. It is evident that it is an anthology of advices, of reproaches, of suggestions, so that the Christian life may always be more authentic and coherent. This is the intention of the letter of James.